Okay, we'll start with this. Well, as previously reported, as a result of Jermell Charlo unifying 3 of the 4 major titles in his prescribed weight class, the junior middleweight division, he effectively bumps off Kosei Tanaka, 3-division champion Kosei Tanaka, from the number 10 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, as Kosei was in the most danger of being bumped off. Kosei was ranked as a champion in transition, meaning the jury was still out as to whether or not his very next fight was going to be a world title fight. In the event that he won the fight, he would have advanced on the list, but he was maintaining that spot on the premise that his next fight would be a world title fight. And as it stands, we just don't know where we are with that Kazuto Ioka fight. We don't know when we should expect that fight to happen, and currently Kosei isn't in possession of a world title. His saving grace is that if and when that fight happens, given the merits he's already amassed in his career, the fact that he's unseated 1 active reigning world champion, been a champion in 3 weight classes, it's conceivable that he will be reintegrated into the list at some point, very similar to what occurred with Naoya Inoue. But as it stands, the argument for Jermell Charlo to be ranked on this list instead of Kosei Tanaka is a tad bit stronger. Jermell Charlo is currently in possession of 3 world titles to Kosei Tanaka's none.
And the Ring Magazine belt.
There is set to be a lot of movement on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list in the very near future. We talked about the possible Kosei Tanaka versus Kazuto Ioka fight, a fight that could see Kazuto getting bumped on this list and replaced by Kosei Tanaka. Kosei, who would have become a 4-division champion in the event that's the way the cookie crumbles. There is also the Juan Francisco Estrada versus Chocolatito rematch to consider. Both of those fighters are ranked on this list. Chocolatito, Roman Gonzalez, ranks in at number 3, whereas Juan Francisco Estrada, El Gallo, ranks in at number 9. Once a victor emerges from that fight, assuming it takes place and it's between these 2 guys, well, somebody's got to go. That will leave a vacant slot for another active reigning world champion with the necessary merits, the necessary requisites to occupy a spot on this list. That could be Josh Taylor, that could be Jose Ramirez, that could be Errol Spence, it could be MJ Akhmadaliev. By the time that Juan Francisco Estrada versus Chocolatito rematch takes place.
Don't forget about Artur Beterbiev,
as he is a unified champion as well. There is also the matter of Leo Santa Cruz versus Gervonta Davis to consider. Leo Santa Cruz, who ranks in at number 8 on this list. Leo Santa Cruz being a 4-division champion who unseated 2 active reigning world champions in Victor Terrazas and Carl Frampton. If Leo loses that Gervonta Davis fight, Leo gets bumped off, and in all likelihood, Gervonta Davis will occupy the number 10 spot. Moving up, all the fighters already ranked on this list up 1 spot, but Gervonta Davis's appearance on this list would be a brief one, per the rules that govern the list. In defeating a pound-for-pound fighter, Gervonta Davis would effectively become one himself, but he'd be ranked at number 10, in the most danger of being bumped off, with a weaker argument than Jermell Charlo, the weakest link on the list here today, as he's in the number 10 spot. Essentially, as soon as a fighter with a more credible argument than Gervonta Davis climbs into the ring and adds more merits to his CV, more merits to their resume, Gervonta Davis would be replaced thereafter. That is, unless Gervonta Davis somehow, some way, strengthens his own argument to maintain that spot. Think about it this way. Gervonta Davis is set to lock horns with Leo Santa Cruz in the very near future, before this year is out. But here today, there are already lots of other fighters with a more credible argument than Gervonta Davis, even if he goes in there and beats Leo from pillar to post. That one victory in and of itself wouldn't be enough for Gervonta Davis to maintain a rank on this list when cross-compared with the careers of other fighters. So the way it breaks down is if Gervonta Davis wins that fight, yeah, he'll make an appearance on the list, but it'll be a brief one, as there are already other fighters out there in possession of more world titles, full-fledged world titles, than Gervonta Davis would be holding, even if he beat Leo. If he beats Leo, he's holding the WBA. Great. But what about unified champion Errol Spence? What about unified champion Artur Beterbiev? MJ Akhmadaliev? What about Jose Ramirez? What about Josh Taylor? And what about those other fighters out there who have been champions full-fledged world champions in more weight classes than Gervonta Davis. What about Demetrius Andrade? What about Billy Joe Saunders? Gervonta Davis ain't no two-division champion. That belt he's holding at 135 is a trinket title, a baby belt. Little more than a commemorative item that commemorates a title shot that he's not going to take against the winner of Lomachenko versus Lopez. Davis ain't no two-division champion, but those guys are. Demetrius Andrade was a champion at 154, and he's currently a champion at 160. Billy Joe Saunders was a champion at 160 pounds, and now he's a champion at 168. Tenuous argument that it might be, those guys have a slightly more credible argument than Gervonta Davis. He's only ever been a champion in one weight class. Even if he beats Leo, that doesn't change. That is the update to the current rank standings on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list and what updates are set to go down in the near future depending on how the cookie crumbles. Congratulations to Jermell. And now another bit of news that might affect the current rank standings on the list based on some news that broke 1 or 2 days ago per tweet from Michael Benson. Statement from Manny Pacquiao's office. For the sake of all the Filipino COVID-19 victims, Senator Manny Pacquiao will be fighting UFC superstar Conor Mcgregor next year. The huge portion of his earnings will proceed to those who are affected nationwide by the pandemic. Manny Pacquiao is widely regarded for his philanthropic work and his dedication to his people in the Philippines.
He's praised for it.
In truth, I take no issue with Manny Pacquiao being the next fighter, the next accomplished fighter, to participate in one of these novelty fights, one of these circus acts.
Doesn't bother me.
Floyd Mayweather Jr. did it. Very recently, there were talks that Floyd Mayweather Jr. might be fighting Logan Paul, a YouTube celebrity. And I'll tell you now, like I told you before, these kinds of novelty fights, these kinds of circus acts, these kinds of freak shows happen more often in the sport of boxing and have happened more often in the sport of boxing than people care to realize. So anyone turning their nose up at the prospect of these matches is likely someone who doesn't really know the history of the sport of boxing. It's nothing to lose sleep over. It's happened before, it'll happen again, and next time it might be Manny Pacquiao versus Conor McGregor. I only wonder, where are all those people and where is the energy that I saw exhibited when Floyd Mayweather Jr. was the one fighting Conor McGregor? Where are all those critics who criticized Floyd for doing what Manny is now attempting to do in his shadow? There were a lot of people that had a lot of things to say about Floyd Mayweather Jr. for participating in this cash grab. And I don't see that energy being expressed when it comes to Manny. Is it because it's for a noble cause? Because it's for his people? Give me a break.
For charity.
Spare me the headlines. A cash grab is a cash grab, and it just so happens that Manny Pacquiao is going about grabbing that cash the exact same way that Floyd Mayweather Jr. did with the exact same guy. And I'm not critical of him for doing it the same way I wasn't critical of Floyd for doing it. I'm just saying that a lot of people just can't seem to keep the same energy.
It's a lot of hypocritical shit going on.
If I had one gripe, just one, with Manny Pacquiao, it's that Manny Pacquiao, unlike Floyd Mayweather Jr., when he had this crossover fight with a UFC guy, Manny's in possession of a world title, whereas Floyd Mayweather Jr. was not. Essentially, Floyd Mayweather Jr. wasn't holding anything up in the sport of boxing. But Manny would be, because Manny currently, here today, is the WBA's welterweight super champion. He is in possession of the super title. He's in possession of a full-fledged world title. And he's not affording the other contenders and the other baby belt holders an opportunity to challenge him for his version of the title. He's not affording them an opportunity to fight him, which is fine. But if you're not going to afford those guys that opportunity, and this is the stage in your career that you're in, the twilight of it, where you're having crossover fights for cash grabs, if that's where you're at, then vacate the title.
You don't need it anymore.
If you're not going to unify with Terrence, and you're not going to unify with the winner of Spence versus Garcia, and you're not going to afford the other contenders in the WBA's ranked standings an opportunity to win that belt from you, then just let it go. Because if you don't, what you are doing is holding up the unification process in a welterweight division. If Manny vacates that title, in all likelihood, Yordenis Ugas would be elevated to full-fledged WBA champion in the welterweight division. And a fight between Ugas and the winner of Spence versus Garcia would then make a lot of sense, as there would be 3 of the 4 major titles on the line, thereby moving the unification process along. But so long as Manny's holding on to that title, that ain't gonna happen. Manny Pacquiao himself, he doesn't look like he's trying to fight Terrence Crawford or the winner of Spence versus Garcia. He doesn't look like he's set to defend that title against against the highest-ranked contenders in the WBA's ranked standings. Well, if that's the case, that's fine. Manny's a proven fighter that doesn't owe a lot of people a lot of anything. But so long as he's a champion, there are certain requisites that come with that. And if he doesn't want to meet those requisites, if he doesn't want to meet those ideals, then let the belt go. How many more fights does Manny Pacquiao have left in him anyway? This news is legitimate. This news is from the desk of the Manny Pacquiao team, the Manny Pacquiao people. Conor Mcgregor has been seen inside of a boxing ring doing his best impression of a boxer, some kind of shadow boxing, some kind of strange moves he's doing, but the guy looks like he means business. And all of this news circulating looks to be the real thing. So if Manny Pacquiao is set to fight Conor McGregor at some point at the end of this year, or in all likelihood next year, that's fine. Take the cash grab. You won't be the first guy that did it, but don't hold up the sport of boxing while you're doing it.
That's my one hang-up.
That is my one gripe. That is my one complaint. It's already been a year since Manny won that title, you understand. It's already been a year since the Keith Thurman fight. Obviously, whatever future plans Manny Pacquiao had afterwards, after that fight, were sidetracked, were put on hold by the COVID-19 pandemic. He's just affected by this as anyone else, and I completely understand if he wants to spend what remains of his career participating in this kind of a novelty act, this kind of a crossover fight, as it is the best bang for his buck fight he can be in. Believe you me, he'll make more money in that crossover fight with Conor than he would with Crawford or fighting the winner of Spence versus Garcia, so I get it. But as far as being a full-fledged world champion in the sport of boxing, it's already been a year since you won that belt. And they're talking about staging this thing at some point, in all likelihood, early next year. You don't need a full-fledged world title to participate in this freak show.
He needs to let that belt go.
No, he doesn't have intentions of defending it against Conor McGregor. You're not going to tell me that Conor McGregor is more deserving of a world title shot than the actual boxers working their way up those ranked standings, the actual world champions in the sport. I know he doesn't have intentions of defending that world title, that WBA title, against Conor McGregor, because that would be a travesty.
He needs to let that belt go.
And finally, just in keeping with the theme of things that might affect the current ranked standings on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, per tweet from Michael Benson, Bob Arum has stated that Josh Taylor's next fight will be the unification match with Jose Ramirez in January or February. Taylor is WBA and IBF champion. Ramirez is WBC and WBO champion, but may have to vacate the WBO as Jack Caterrall is due his mandatory title shot. And I understand the mandatory process, the need for it, and how sometimes, yes, it's an evil, but it is a necessary evil, because for some guys, this is the only way they'll get the fight for a world title. So in that way, I don't dismiss this process and the alphabets that perform this function whenever it's convenient.
Mandatories are necessary.
Because would the then WBC light heavyweight champion Adonis Stevenson have taken on a contender, a formidable contender like Alexander Vosdik if he had a choice? Do you think he had that fight because he had a choice? No, he had that fight because he was under direct orders to do so. And if he did not comply, his title would be forfeit. Do you think that Kell Brook would have voluntarily fought Errol Spence Jr. under those circumstances if Errol Spence Jr. weren't his mandatory challenger? When Kell Brook was coming off of that loss to Gennady Golovkin, do you think he wanted to have to fight Errol Spence right afterwards?
Do you?
The mandatory process is a necessary evil. I understand its function, and I respect it. I'll even go as far as saying that I understand why Jack Caterrall is being so adamant, why he's pushing the envelope and enforcing the mandatory. I understand that it's not the same thing winning a vacant title than if you won it from the champion. If you locked horns with the reigning champion and won it from them, as opposed to fighting for a title that no one was holding. I understand where Jack is coming from. It's just that I read this news and I think to myself, it looks like in either scenario, Jack might end up fighting for a vacant title. So for fighting for a vacant title as a result of pushing the envelope, why don't you just step aside? I mean, he might as well. If this is what pushing the envelope gets you, if this is what pushing for that title shot sooner rather than later is going to get you, you end up fighting for a vacant title anyway, you might as well negotiate a step-aside deal to fight the winner of Taylor versus Ramirez, as you'd have a better chance of fighting a reigning champion in that scenario than what you're doing here and now. These guys are threatening to throw that title in the air and go forward with their plans. Bob Arum's not fucking around. You know, Bob Arum's always had a way with Paco. He's always had a way with the WBO, and I thought that Bob Arum, in his fashion, would have found reconciliation for this issue by now, but it seems that Jack Caterrall very much is a problem, and he's not budging.
He's not going away.
Even stranger is that the WBO is endorsing him. They are behind him and his campaign to fight for a title at a time when we're very close to the next undisputed championship fight in the 140-pound division. But if what all of this results in is the WBO title going vacant, then Jack might as well just step aside. Let those guys fight. Let an undisputed champion be crowned. And then you push for your title shot. That way you can fight for all 4 alphabets and the Ring Magazine title and lineal status instead of just the WBO title. It's a common sense argument. And if the undisputed champion skips out on you, the titles go vacant, well, that's what was going to happen anyway, isn't it? Whether you pushed for the shot or not. But at least this way, perhaps you can buy yourself a little bit of time. Maybe, just maybe, make a little bit of step-aside money. If you hold your horses, I'll tell you, I'd hate to think that what was to be the next undisputed title fight in the 140-pound division has been dashed by Jack fucking Caterrall.